The first humans were hunters, spending most of their time and energy trying to keep themselves alive. We lived like that for many thousands of years until some smart people began figuring out farming and livestock. After this new technology spread over the course of thousands of years, people shifted into communities of around 150 people on average. From then on, no matter how big or small of a town you lived in, your communal circle remained the same for about 100 centuries. This was true until social media emerged, breaking our society's communal fabric and leaving us all feeling lonely. As humans, we are just animals, and animals evolved their bodies and their behavior over tens of thousands of years of natural selection. We forget that things don't change overnight because so much of our world does change on a dime. But the reality is that we, as humans, are not evolving at some elevated rate. We are not some super versions of our ancestors. Sure, we have more technology, and we are generally much fatter than our distant relatives, but our bodies, and more importantly our brains, work the same way. Because of this, because none of us are superhuman, social media is actively destroying the fabric of society. It took humans thousands of years to evolve social behavior and eventually whole societies based on communal living. And social media goes against that long-learned behavior. Anyone my age or older will understand this better than younger people, but there was a time when even if you didn't like your neighbor, you still got along with them. In this video, I will first lay the groundwork for understanding this problem by briefly explaining our species' social evolution. After that, we'll look at our social brains and how they're wired to work today and for the last several thousand years. Finally, we'll explore the primary question of this video. Why is social media breaking society? As usual, I won't tell you about all the problems and just leave you hanging. After this video, I'll let you know a few things you can do to protect yourself. Before I distill tens of thousands of years of human social evolution into a few minutes, I do think it's essential to make sure that you know that as someone born in 1980, I consider myself part of the Xennial generation. I aim to explore concepts through this channel from our unique perspective, since Xennials are the only generation raised both analog and digital. My videos showcase my philosophical understanding of the subject, supplemented with verifiable facts and information to support my beliefs. If you disagree or have something to add, I welcome your thoughts and opinions in the comments below. As always, there are chapters in the description that will let you skip to any section you want. Thanks for checking out my creation, and if you're new here at the Xennial Philosopher, I hope you'll subscribe and return soon to continue to expand your perception and grow your mind alongside me. Now, let's quickly look at how we got from scrambling for calories to living in cities. Part 1. Evolution does not keep up. We'll need to start at the beginning of humanity, briefly. You see, the earliest people we might recognize as our ancestors, the first Homo sapiens, were initially seen by the world in Africa over 300,000 years ago. And like the animals they evolved from, our earliest ancestors survived by hunting and gathering what they needed. Our progenitors lived like this, on the edge of survival, striving daily to get enough calories to live another day for over 290,000 years. Let that sink in. We lived as independent hunter-gatherers in caves and under rock outcroppings for longer, much longer than in societies with homes and farming. For nearly 300,000 years, nothing changed. Humans lived one way, and countless generations lived and died within the strictures of fighting for enough calories to survive another day. Then, finally, about 10,000 years ago, or 8,000 BCE, agriculture and the beginnings of society emerged in the Fertile Crescent of Mesopotamia. In that region, people lifted themselves out of survival into early societies by changing how they thought and lived. And this took eons to spread. In fact, the first signs of communal living and agriculture date to 8000 BCE, but the first real civilizations sprung up nearly 4,000 years later. This change, which did not happen overnight, was the last significant evolutionary change that our minds went through. The transition from living lonely, survival-oriented lives to working communally for the good of the community instead of just what is needed for oneself. That means today, we humans have been living in communities for over 10,000 years and within society for nearly 6,000. Our brains and bodies worked very hard over generations to evolve our mindset from solitary to one that willingly and mostly happily worked within the confines of the social norms we need to follow to maintain sustainable societies. Norms like don't steal, or be honest, or don't kill people. You know, the common courtesies society needs to survive. And these community-related traits, once bred into our psyche, have solidified over the last 100 centuries. This is because the human condition of working in a community remained the same through all the various societies that rose and fell, and cities that grew and shrank. It doesn't matter if you live in a village of 500 people or a city of millions. If you lived in the 1st or the 20th century, the average size of a person's face-to-face community has remained around 150 since we started living together. For all these thousands of years, humans, regardless of time or location, led relatively similar lives from about 8000 BCE before we saw any significant disruption to this ingrained way we live. Then the baby boomers happened. Before the boomers started coming of age in the early 1960s, most people lived lives similar to their ancestors, growing, working, and reproducing. People before the 1960s, and for all of those thousands of years before then, all lived roughly the same way. From the beginning, we had communities of around 150 people that we interact with regularly. According to the oft-cited psychologist Robin Dunbar, the maximum number of relationships the human mind can cognitively maintain simultaneously is 150. Now, the thing the baby boomers did in the 60s and 70s was to shift their view from their small community of people to more global issues. In a paper written by Alan Greenblatt in 2023, he explained that the era's mass social movements specifically helped people shift the focus from local concerns to more national and global ones. No longer was a person's worldview directly influenced or shaped only by their community, meaning that these newly minted hippies and anarchists had to shrug off social norms and view the world differently, trying to include more than that evolutionary encoded limit of 150 people. The only thing that held them back was a lack of our modern technology to speed up communications, which changed in the early 2000s. Now, the baby boomers were just the ones who poisoned the fabric of society and attempted to change it. The subsequent generations and their world-changing inventions have taken the destruction to new levels and essentially decapitated our social norms with the advent of social media. But you know enough about how these got to be this way and how we evolved over such long time spans to be communal, societal creatures. Now let's explore a little about those social brains we all have in our head and how things have changed so drastically in less than 40 years. Part 2. Our social brains. Most of you can remember the days before social media, the internet, and the bombardment of information it represents that inundates us now. Now, think back to those days as we go through this first part, looking at how our human communities existed until recently. We humans started roaming and hunting to stay alive. After farming was invented, it spread and people gathered into small farming communities. Finally, as we evolved further, our society grew and some of these smaller communities banded together and started making cities. Because the more people that worked together, the more free time everyone had to pursue entertainment, the arts, or whatever they wanted. But it's important to remember that regardless of the overall size of the cities or empires we raised, our communities stayed roughly the same size. We had about 150 people who lived near us. Whether we liked it or not, this was the totality of people in our lives. I assume many of you are old enough to remember when social media didn't exist and will immediately understand what I just explained. For the rest of you, hear me out. My community was like this when I grew up in the 80s and 90s. I knew the people at my school, those in my neighborhood, and those who attended the church that my parents drugged me to. And there was something very different about how we lived and interacted with other people back then, in the before times. Hopefully you'll remember something like the following from the past. Regardless of how much you disagreed with someone in your real-life community, you didn't typically hate them because they were still part of your community. Now, you might disagree with your neighbor's political views, but they also worked at the local grocery store or they teach at your kid's school. Before social media, you had to get along anyway because it made sense from a social point of view. Think about it. The 150 people in your face-to-face community may have had things you did not like about them, but it was impossible not to see them from other angles as human beings in the same boat. Because you would have to face this person at some point, either at school or your place of employment, you didn't immediately hate them for voting for Reagan or being of a different religion. Not because you agreed with or tolerated them, but because they were a person who liked the same sports ball team or attended your church. Even just the fact that they were an actual person with a face made you consider more than just the one thing you didn't agree on. This is how people, almost all people, lived from the time of the first communities that sprouted up around the Euphrates and Tigris rivers, all the way through time to the town where you grew up. As we learned in the first section, it took us nearly 4,000 more years to make cities and civilizations from those communities. Remembering that evolution is slow, and remembering that we lived in roughly the same sized communities for literally thousands of years, we will finally move on to why exactly it is that social media is making you and everyone else feel so lonely. Part 3. Why social media is making you lonely. I know I keep bringing up timelines here, and that's because these are such long time spans, it's hard for us as short-lived beings to even grasp them. To start this final section, let me give these timelines a little bit of perspective. Think of it like this. The calendar we use began a little over 2,000 years ago, and 21 centuries have been clocked so far. That means we've been living in communities and working with others face to face 5 times longer than the years we measure on our calendar. On top of that, it took us about 300,000 years to evolve our minds to the point that we could work together and even create communities. We've only lived and worked together for 1/30th of the time we spent as hunter-gatherers. As discussed in the first section, there was a 4,000-year time span between the first communities and farms and the first cities and empires. That means that even when humans figured out how much easier life can be if we work with others, it still took us generations to embrace our fellow humans fully. My point here is that none of this happened quickly, in terms of a human life especially. But the changes that have been taking place in society in the last 20 years or so have completely broken down the carefully evolved architecture our societies ran on, causing an epidemic of lonely and sad people. As I alluded to earlier, the hippie and political movements that started in the 60s and 70s were the first signs of the breakdown of the communal fabric that makes up our society. With the biggest baby boom in history, well, till the millennials, that made up their generation, the boomers had to look beyond their small communities to find a place. They had to do this because overcrowding threatened the social norms and traditions of our communal living for the first time in human history. Because of this, they began thinking about more global concerns. Fortunately for the subsequent generations, the baby boomers' changes in global views didn't exactly last. They mostly settled back into average 150-person communities by the time they had kids. This is why any of you who are older millennials, Xennials, Gen X, or anyone older really, you'll easily remember what living in a small in-person community was like. We remember that there were people we didn't like, but still got along with because they were part of the community. You didn't hate someone for one thing they believed or did because all the people in your community were just that, people. Then, as the millennium changed and computing became ever more ubiquitous, something sinister began to grow: social media. It started with things like MySpace, which was just a website for people to share their favorite things and generally connect with their existing community, but on the internet. Then in 2008, Apple released the first iPhone, and the death knell for in-person communities was heard worldwide. Along with the iPhone's release, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and dozens of other social media sites began taking larger shares of people's time, effectively shrinking in-person communities in the span of just a few years. Now we are in the 2020s and social media seems to be everywhere. It controls large portions of our lives, even though it actively hurts us all. Social media broke the fundamental piece of the human psyche, community or communal thinking. No longer was your community the 150 people you would interact with regularly. No longer did your community even have faces. Instead, social media fostered the worst traits in humankind and fed on people's fears and insecurities to force everyone to put themselves into a box. And these were broad boxes based on a single facet of a person, like your political affiliation or maybe a band you really like. Now, this seemed pretty cool at first. It was really nice to be able to find geographically diverse groups of people who had similar interests to me. And I'm sure most of you also thought it was new and very exciting. But what we didn't realize is that by allowing ourselves to be pigeonholed into like-minded communities of faceless people online, it becomes exceedingly easy to dismiss anyone not in your group as an other or an enemy of you and your group. Today, the internet, especially social media sites, are full of people who hate everyone not in their group and have decided to throw any social norms out the window. Do you know what I mean? Just look at Twitter or Facebook any day and see the arguments, insults, and slurs thrown around with impunity. We did not evolve to have 1 million people in our communities. Our brains can't handle it. So we have digressed to reactionary and angry people who only see things in black and white or good and evil, when the reality is, as we knew it growing up, people are people and they have many facets to them. Any one thing about them should not immediately disqualify them from being considered a human being. Conclusion: how to stay safe. In this video, we journeyed through the extensive timeline of human social evolution, and then we took a look at how the baby boomers shot society in the foot, hobbling and harming the very fabric of society. But the advent of social media took that wounded social fabric, covered it in corrosive and flammable chemicals, and then proceeded to start it on fire. Now, let's look at some ways to improve things, or at the very least, better protect yourself and your loved ones. Obviously, there is a straightforward answer that will, at the very least, keep you personally safe from the evils of social media. Delete them and stop looking. But we do live in the social media age, so unless you happen to be a hermit living in the woods or an Amish living in the countryside of Pennsylvania, it's going to be challenging to get along in the modern world without Reddit, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, or 100 other social media services that we rely on for news, updates on distant friends and relatives, and as well as a place to have some semblance of a community. But few have fully grasped that social media communities are not the same as in-person communities that we've lived in for the last 10,000 years or so. This is where we come to a concept I so often bring up: common sense. Now, I understand that using one's common sense appears to be exceedingly difficult for a lot of people, but I think that if you're smart enough to watch and understand my videos, you're smart enough to use common sense. These obvious fixes will help you be better connected with reality and less reliant on the social media insanity that too many modern people rely on. Here are some things you can do to still get the unavoidable access to social media without giving over your and society's soul to Meta or Twitter. Number 1, set some limits. You can do this yourself if you're very confident in your own self-control, or if you're like me, you can set alarms or even use settings on your devices that will limit your daily usage. The more time you spend on your phone, the less time you spend with people. The second approach is even more straightforward. Turn off the alerts from all social media applications on your device. Then, once you've gone a month with the alerts turned off, reassess how much you need to use that service. You'll end up with a few specific sites you find you do use frequently. For example, after this exercise, I found I was happier not using Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, leaving me with Reddit, YouTube, and LinkedIn. But those are mainly for professional reasons. Now, if you try to readjust your social media intake and complete these exercises, you'll find that the services you no longer use won't be missed. Your life will go on, and you'll likely find that you're even happier and enjoy a more grounded life without the chaos of social media. I know these things are hard today since the vast majority of people have their noses in their smartphones every second of every day. But if you really want to help fix the world, if you want to help reweave the fabric of our society, you can. All you need to do is reinforce and grow your own in-person community. Spend more time with others. Get your face away from your glowing phone screen and exchange the stresses and uncertainty it represents for a better, more connected life. What did you think about these concepts? Do you plan to learn more from the resources below? Check out the references and links to related videos and articles in the description to learn more about this video's topic. If you still need to subscribe to the channel, remember so that you'll get the new videos to expand your mind and grow your perception.